Well, they've been around for about 15 years now, but it seems like everybody's got some sort of GPS technology, whether it's on their wristwatch or whether they're wearing it on their back during a game. It's all over AFL, NRL, basically any outdoor team sport wears them. So today we're going to talk all things GPS and how we can get the most out of their technology.
Get strong.
Unfortunately, it's only two of us here today. I'm not sure where Sean is. I think he might have broken down somewhere in his Falcon, but nonetheless, we've got the main man here. We've got Damo. How are you, Damo? What's going on?
Yeah, really good, Rob. It is a little bit different not having the three of us here, but we thought we could still make it work, so we'll see how we go.
Yeah, absolutely. We're soldiering on here. I don't think we need Sean for this one anyway. He's out packing them somewhere. So pressing on today's podcast, a bit of a different sort of change of pace. It's more talking about specifically GPS technology. It's pretty important within sort of applied sports science and athletic performance itself. So it's going to be a bit of a Q&A, a bit of a roundtable sort of discussion between Damo and myself, just sort of talking about how we can get best out of the technology. So keen to get stuck into it. But firstly, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel and liking it as well on the various platforms. So whether that be YouTube or Apple iTunes, the podcast, all the podcast forums as well, there, Spotify, anything along those lines. We've also got plenty of other content going on with 180 debates, arguing about the contentious topics, a few tutorial videos on there. Damo's got a couple of solo videos as well. Even Sean's going on there as well. So check that out. Check out Facebook, Instagram, TikToks, Reels, everything. There's heaps of stuff going on, and LinkedIn as well. LinkedIn, doing a bit of work on LinkedIn there, trying to keep our nose out of trouble there. Although we have gotten a few nice sort of robust discussions since then, Damo.
Yeah, we've poked the bear a little bit and got a few people involved, which is good. But yeah, that's what we're looking for, stimulating some conversation between industry professionals a little bit more on the LinkedIn platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, some robust discussion. That's what we want. Like, we're not trying to make enemies, but we do want to have some thought-provoking conversation on there anyway.
Yeah.
But that's for another day anyway. I'm sure we can do an after hours podcast episode. But today's one, I'm going to get stuck into GPS tech. So let's get stuck into it.
Right. So as Rob alluded to in the little intro there, we're doing things a little bit different today. So Rob is our industry expert when it comes to GPS and that sort of technology. So instead of sort of him leading the way today, it's going to be me sort of running a bit of a Q&A with him and just picking his brain about what he thinks about GPS and how to best apply it, and probably tailored a little bit more to that sub-elite environment where a lot of the people that we're targeting are involved. So just for anyone that isn't familiar with sports science technology and GPS units, do you want to just give us a quick rundown on GPS technology, how they work, and sort of what information they provide, Rob?
Yeah, absolutely. So I alluded to in the intro, GPS has been around a long time now, and it's basically a similar premise to the GPS in your car or on your watch or wherever it might be. So first and foremost, GPS is basically a satellite network that orbits the Earth, and essentially through some technological advances, we can gain access to some pretty useful information from the GPS. So essentially, first and foremost, it tells us position. So where we are on the planet, which is basically the backbone that underpins most of the metrics we look at. So once we know position, then we can start to triangulate distance. And then once we know distance and time, then we can get some speed as well. So essentially the GPS, that's what the basis of it is. And a particular application to team sport is distance, time, speed, basically volume, velocity. That's how we generate everything from the GPS. So that's like the basis of what we use it for and how we sort of get there. We don't need to go too more technical than that because I think we'll lose a few people along the way. Essentially, it sort of came in around, I'd say, early 2000s. There was a bit of sort of initial development into it, and then I think AFL was probably one of the initial adopters of it in terms of using the tech, probably like 2006, 2007, and they were really big, bulky units. So a lot's changed since then, and now obviously with the technological advances, we have a bit more of an application at the sub-elite level because the technology is getting cheaper and it's more accessible now, which is really good.
Yeah, in terms of accuracy, how accurate are these devices today. We've got Garmin watch, which we've talked about in a different episode, but in terms of the units you put on your back.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, and like obviously I said, the technology is getting a lot better than what it was. For distance, I reckon they're pretty good. They're really good. I wouldn't have too much issue with that. Even the distance on your Garmin watch is still pretty good too. So from that point of view, distance is probably one of the best metrics and most accurate metrics you can get on a GPS, because it's one of the basic elements that actually sort of help us track. So if distance is no good on that, then nothing else would be. But distance is really good. Velocity speed is a lot better than what it used to be as well, particularly top end speed. So your max speeds and stuff on the GPS is a lot better than what it used to be. Early days, there was a bit of variation and fluctuation there with peak speed, but that's gotten a lot better. The only one that's probably still a bit, it's got a bit of variation to it and a bit of speculation as to its accuracy, would be high speed running. So like when we get sort of continuous, not necessarily continuous, but when we get high speed running efforts, and then probably even more so acceleration and deceleration efforts, they're probably where the most variation is, and the most speculation as to whether there's accuracy there or not in the GPS. So for instance, if we're talking about accelerations and decelerations, that means basically stop starting, and it's a bit difficult for the GPS to pick that up, particularly deceleration, because your body can stop a lot quicker than what it can accelerate. So if you're running very fast and then you basically just come to a quick stop, that's very hard for the GPS to accurately sort of track historically from what we know. So otherwise, it's pretty good. And if we're being honest, at a sub-elite level, it's surplus to your requirements. The accuracy is fine for what you need there. It's not like at the elite level where, particularly in AFL, where you're tracking people's numbers by the meter, so to speak. So for that instance, mate, it's pretty good. I'd use it.
Yep, perfect. I think that covers it off pretty well in terms of the basics that you need to know about it. So sort of moving forward, we're going to go into quite a few questions that we've got here. But so if you are a sub-elite club and you're looking at investing in GPS technology, where do you start and what would you recommend? So I guess to get started, at a minimum, what equipment, staff, experience do you need to have an effective monitoring system?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's a lot of different elements to it that I think that people need to consider. The first and foremost thing you need to consider is, well, who's going to operate and who's going to use it. I think you need somebody. It just has to be somebody who hopefully has some sort of knowledge of volumes, or maybe strength and conditioning, sports science experience. However, having said that, I think you can learn a lot on the job as well. Like it's with the software now, it's pretty easy to sort of use and navigate, and it's pretty easy to wrap your head around once you've used it. But having said that, you need someone who is at training and who sees what the players do. I think that if you have first-hand knowledge and you've seen what players have done, then it's going to be a lot easier to rationalize the data and make sense of it. Because if you haven't seen it, or haven't seen a training session, you don't know what's actually happening, then it's very difficult to sort of make some assumptions and some estimations as to what's happened. So first and foremost, I'd suggest that you get someone who's basically at training all the time and has some sort of knowledge and interest in using the tech. That's the first one. And then the tech itself.
Sorry to jump in there, Rob. But so would you suggest that the person that's prescribing the training essentially should kind of oversee that, because they have an understanding of, I guess, what volume and intensity they're looking to get, and then they're just using the GPS data to sort of, I guess, justify and show that they've actually got there with some objective data rather than subjective data. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and that is the ideal situation, I'd say. You need, obviously, your performance, whoever that is, your head of performance, strength and conditioning coach, they're the ideal candidates, because if they're prescribing the load, then it's easier for them to get that initial feedback as to, where they're at compared to where they want to be. So, yeah, obviously, they're the first port of call. But then, obviously, I know that if you're a strength and conditioning coach at sub-elite level, you may actually need to be doing stuff firstly during the session, and then your time commitments away from that as well. So in an ideal world, then using the S&C or the person who's prescribing the load, but it's not the be-all and end-all. But if it isn't you, then you need to have good communication with the person who is doing it, and some solid expectations around what data you want to see and how you want to present it. But obviously your gold standard there is getting the person who's in charge of prescribing guys to have a look at the data and be in charge of it, I'd say, particularly at sub-elite level.
In terms of, we've covered sort of probably the staff and the experience. In terms of equipment, what do you think you need there?
So I think we firstly need a decent laptop, for one. So it depends on the GPS software that you use and the people and the manufacturers you go with. But generally, you need a pretty decent laptop to sort of run the software, particularly if you want to do stuff live, although I'm not sure how necessary that is. But decent laptop to start. And then obviously you need the GPS devices themselves and the software, but the software generally comes when you subscribe and you pay up for the GPS units themselves. So from that front, I'd say you probably need a minimum of 6 units to make it worthwhile, I'd say, because otherwise, if you have less than that, you're probably not collecting enough data to make any sort of meaningful assumptions. Like, this is purely sub-elite level we're talking from. So, like, if you want to use AFL as an example, then I think 6 would be good because at a minimum, because that's a third of your playing team on the field. And then you could probably divide that up into your playing groups there as well to get sort of a broad understanding of the different positions there. But 6 and then as many as you can get after that, I think is a good starting point.
Yeah, so with AFL, for example, you might go 2 backs, 2 mids, 2 forwards, and you're getting some comparative data across those playing areas.
Yeah, I think that's the best blueprint to start from as well. And then obviously if you've got more money to build upon that, then great, and then build from there. But I think that's a good starting point. I think once you actually get the data, like once you get the GPS up and running in terms of like the software and you start collecting data, then I think that's probably where the can of worms starts, because you're given all these shiny metrics and all these cool charts and workloads and threshold bands, speed zones, all these different things. And then that's when I think you can get a bit overwhelmed by the scope of what GPS actually provides. Because a lot of people probably don't understand how much information you can get from these devices, which I think it might be a bit of an issue, because once people see what they get, then they might go a bit, I'll look at all these different reports we can sort of do. But I think it's important to realize the scope of what you get at GPS. Like, you can use it and you can pivot around GPS as well. Like, you can use some of the metrics to do some tactical based stuff in terms of, well, how long are we spending in attack and defense? Like, you can use it for that, or you can go into establishing competition demands for different positions, or creating benchmarks for drills and seeing what your drills actually look like, and creating databases. So, mate, there's heaps of stuff you can do early, and that's why it can get a bit overwhelming initially. So I think if you can understand the gravity of how much information you can collect, then you can probably start to go and see what information you actually need to look at.
I know personally from working with SPT at the sub-elite level, on the base package, you're looking at 10 to 12 variables there alone, and that's without even really paying for. That's just the free version of the software. As soon as you upgrade, you get probably 6 or 7 more variables on top of that, and it's already quite overwhelming to look at. So like you said, you can really get down the rabbit hole if you don't know specifically what you want to look at, or if you just start playing around with it. You can really end up with hours and hours and hours of time spent on there analyzing data and picking out things.
Oh, mate, absolutely. And that's the thing. I think that if you can, I don't necessarily think that if you're having to play around with what you can see or what you can get is a bad thing per se, but I think you still need to have in the back of your head what you want to actually look at first, and what you think is beneficial before you really get into it. Because as you say, like, you can get lost in the amount of data that you can actually get from the tech.
Yeah, I think, what are they, paralysis by analysis they use once you get in there.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's there's a few steps we'll probably talk about later on in terms of how to sort of set it up. But first and foremost, like, there's no problem playing around with the tech, but just be aware that you can get out of hand pretty quickly with what you look at.
Yeah, so that's probably a pretty good segue into the next point we've got here, Rob, which is about sort of when and how often you should collect data from your athletes.
That is a great point. I'd say, well, firstly, if you're just starting out and you don't have any preconceived data, or you don't have any historical data to work with, then I'd say collect as much as you can. So that means training sessions and obviously match days in particular. But I'd say just not main training sessions, but all your on-field training sessions I'd include, and then competition as well, match day. They're the main ones. it's optional, up to you whether you want to do sort of like rehab sessions and all that sort of stuff. Like, I don't think that's particularly necessary if you're just starting out and trying to build your knowledge base. But yeah, I'd say as much as you can when you're just beginning, because essentially in order to make informed decisions, you need a lot of data, and you need a lot of consistent data as well. So if you're just collect as much as you can, and then sort of figure out what you've got. If you've already got established data and you know and you have a good understanding of what your demands are in training and competition, then obviously then you probably you don't need to collect as much if that's not what you want to do. But my first priority and preference always is to collect as much as you can, because you can always use it going forward or to look back on later on. So you'll never know when you might need it.
Yeah, once you build that bank, so if you've been somewhere for a couple of years doing the program for a full season, you're going to have data to refer back to, and then you can sort of go from there. And if you go, well, we've done these drills previously and this sort of stuff, you're going to have good contextual evidence of what's been going on. So like you said, you can sort of refer back, when we do this drill, we normally get this. Maybe it doesn't really matter if I pick up that data if you can't do it because you're busy with something else. But yeah, and absolutely. And we're talking from the sub-elite level here as well. So there's people have other things going on in their lives and time commitments as well. So it's not a perfect world. The perfect world is the elite level where they have people employed all the time to do it, and they collect as much as they can there. But obviously there's different time constraints and pressures on people at the sub-elite level as well. But I think that's just common sense, I think, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. So that's probably, again, a great segue into the next part. So sort of who should we be collecting data from? And this is something that I've sort of experienced as well in collecting data at the sub-elite level, is that training attendance at sub-elite level is quite inconsistent. The missus books a dinner in, or you got to stay back at work or something like that. You don't always have the same players at training. Generally, you'll get a crop of players that are there every session, no matter what. But what do we do to sort of address that if we've got our 6 guys that we've got the units on to get consistent data, but then 2 of them don't rock up for a week or 2 in a row?
Absolutely. Okay, well, the first thing I would do is I'd try and identify the blokes that are the most reliable in terms of training, and then firstly, I think what you should do is put them on your most senior players, because generally they're going to be the most reliable to to training and drive the standards, and hopefully they're probably in your upper echelon of athleticism and skill. So that's what you want to do first, is identify those players. And then hopefully, because this technology is a novelty, it is a novelty at the sub-elite level, but maybe use it as a reward as well. Like if blokes are continuing to turn up to training, they're always there, they're reliable, they want to wear the unit and give you data, then you should reward them for that as well, because I think there's a lot of people that are curious about that information, and it's something that they see at the elite level, and that'd be cool to get some feedback on their own performance. So I think firstly identify your senior players, and then the people that you need or you want data on. Hopefully they're reliable. If not, then move down the chain and reward the people that are reliable and want to wear it and turn up. And then third case scenario down from that is if you're getting people that come in and out of training, chop and change, then identify who's not there and try and substitute the unit with a player who's most alike the player who's not there. So hopefully try and substitute like for like if you can, although there's no such thing, but you have to try and do your best, because obviously it's going to be half art, half science, particularly at that sub-elite level. As like as you said, Dana, people rock up, they don't rock up, they say they're working, all that sort of stuff. So that would be my 3-step sort of priority system there, I reckon.
Yeah. You get some people that don't want to put the bra on or the top because they don't want to wear the unit. They think it's uncomfortable or they don't want to do it. So you get things like that as well. So you can't force anyone to do it. But would you encourage as well if people wear their Garmin watches at training to perhaps give you that data as well if you don't have enough units, so that you can sort of compile a bit more evidence?
Yeah, and that's a great sub-elite sort of basically, I think that's a great sub-elite sort of mentality, is that you got to work with what you've got. And a lot of people have Garmin watches. So absolutely, if you can export that data, which you can absolutely export that data, you just probably have to teach people how to do it. Then more data is hopefully more power to you to make decisions. So absolutely, I'd sort of try and get that, although the information won't probably be as specific. But again, probably indication on the load of your training if all else fails. And again, hopefully buyers that buy-in from the athlete, even if you're still getting their data from their watch as well. So, I'd say that there's nothing wrong with that from that point of view.
Yeah, like you said earlier, load is probably, or distance is one of the most accurate values. So if you're getting that from your Garmin watch from 8 players and you've got 8 units, you're covering nearly the entire 18, aren't you? So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly right. And that's what you need. Like, obviously, it's not going to be perfect, and it's not. You don't have the financial infrastructure to do that either. So you have to make do with what you've got, and that's still pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah. It's excellent. I mean, at that level, if you can get nearly the entire team covered, then you're doing very, very well. Unless you've got friends in high places with a few GPS units in the back cupboard.
Or at the back of the truck.
Yeah. So at the sub-elite level, as we've alluded to, money's often a bit tight. And clubs aren't often prepared to pay money for, say, an S&C coach or a sports scientist, as well as the technology. So if we're looking at bang for buck, what brand or device would you recommend that people look at using, Rob?
Yeah, that's a great question as well, and one that's probably got a few variables going into it as well. The first one's going to be what your cost is and what your budget is. That's going to dictate a lot of what you can do, because basically at the upper echelon in terms of elite sports, you've probably got two main sort of companies there, Catapult and Stat Sports. They're probably the main two big players in terms of like the GPS tech. They do offer sort of sub-elite solutions, both those companies, in terms of technology devices there. And then obviously you've got at a sub-elite level specifically, you've got SPT as well. So they're more catered towards your sub-elite athletes, and that's what their branding is essentially around. So they're the three main ones you have to look at. But obviously your budget is going to be the main factor here. So all of those devices, sorry, stumbled across there a few. All those devices will have the appropriate technology to give you the data you need and the accuracy and the validity, reliability, all that sort of stuff. So I wouldn't worry from that. I would personally worry about how many units you can get for a certain amount in terms of your budget. So that might be where you have to do some wheeling and dealing and some haggling and stuff to try and get as many units as you can, because particularly at this level where like data accuracy is important, but it's not the be all and end all as well. So you just want essentially consistent data you can collect week in and week out. So budget is going to be your main consideration. I would suggest trying to get as many units as you can for a certain fixed amount. Try and rent them as well. I wouldn't buy them outright, because if you buy them outright, then you're stuck with them. I'd try and rent where possible, and rent the software as well, because then if something happens to them or they break or whatever, you can swap them in and out, and you can also obviously use the software as well. So that's the main things I do.
So when we're talking price range, so top echelon Catapult, what are we looking at roughly for a single unit?
Oh, geez, that's a good question. And it's not one I actually know. I'm not going to claim I know this, but if you're going to buy one of their top end elite units, I'd say you're probably looking at $1,000+ per unit. But I don't know that. That's just pure speculation. But I'd say it's going to be north of that, to be honest. But if we're looking at more of their sub-elite units and those devices that are catered, I'd say you're probably looking between $200 and $400 a unit. That's probably what you're looking at, depending, again, but if you're going to rent them or you can figure out some sort of deal or package, then obviously they're ballpark figures, but that's what you'd be looking at per unit. So, yeah, it's going to be a bit of money that you're going to have to outlay in order to get the tech working as well. And sometimes you have to subscribe to the software as well, so that might be a cost, but again, that's why it's important to get a package as well, because then that stuff's generally all included and you can sort of get up and running.
Yeah, I think the best thing with those things to do is contact the company directly. They don't normally put the individual price up there, but if you go for a package, as you said, you can wheel and deal a bit and talk to the staff there and sort of work out what's best for you in terms of that. And again, if you do buy them outright, they're pretty durable. It's not the sort of thing that it's a 1-year investment. Like if you have one, they're going to be around for a while. So think of it as sort of a long-term investment as well. They do last quite a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And the tech that they've got at the moment, like probably the first 5 years, like there was a lot of development in the first, probably say from like 2007, 2000 to 2012, up to 2015, there was a lot of development in technology, and now there's still development, but it's probably not occurring at the rate it is now. So these units aren't getting superseded as quickly as what they once were. particularly for what you need at the sub-elite level as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like I roll with half the crop that I use are the S1s and half the crop is the S2s from SBT, and there's really not much difference. I'd actually say the S1's a little bit more reliable in terms of the battery and consistency of data. Yeah, so there you go. But you don't get as much information in terms of deceleration and impacts and change of speed. But, you know, if you're looking for just those general ones, it still works pretty much the same.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so moving on here, Rob, a little bit. So we'll get into the deep end a little bit. So in terms of metrics, as we've discussed along the way, there's quite a few out there. What do you think are the most important to analyze? What would be your sort of top 3, top 5 things that it's a must-have in your analysis?
Absolutely. So I think this is like the nitty-gritty. This is like the best part of the discussion I reckon we'll have. So I think before you actually get into the variables, I reckon the number one thing you need to do, like at the start, is you need to know what your competition demands are, or you need to know not necessarily the demands, but what the expected loads are in terms of distance, volume, speeds, acceleration, decelerations. That's what you need to figure out, because you want to work backwards from that. So once you know what's happening in competition, then you can work backwards and say, well, this is what we need to look at training. So for anyone out there, I'd start with let's collect data on the competition. So let's get as many people as we can to wear the units during a game. Once we know what's happening in a game and we have consistent data over a period of time there, then we work back to training. So once we've identified that, then we look at our metrics and the things we can put in place there. For me personally, I'd say at the sub-elite level, let's maybe look at, say, half a dozen metrics, or 6 to 8 metrics. At the 8's probably at the most there, that we can consistently monitor throughout the season and have a look at. Easy to analyze, easy for us to understand. So
sorry there, Rob. So that assessment of the sport, we'd call that a needs analysis in sports science circles.
Yeah.
If we're looking to get a bit of information on that before we start collecting data, what's the best place to go? Where would we be looking to get that sort of information to get a rough idea of where we'd be?
Well, research is probably the best one. So there's a lot of free information out there, particularly if you're an AFL coach, Australian rules. Sorry, there's heaps of information on athlete on demands and stuff on the internet. So your best friend is Google first and foremost. Ideally, you want to get your information from reputable, published research, but that's not always accessible if you're not in that sort of field and academic circles. But that's where you'd probably start in terms of finding out your expectations and stuff from there, and then you work backwards. So Google, word of thumb, even getting like sports science interns or university students or someone reaching out into that network and strength and conditioning coaches or people within the industry there, that's always good. So word of mouth, getting knowledge from them as well, because they have access to this research as well. So that's probably where it starts, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a couple of great articles out there I know that I've used. So there's one from the Waffle. So for a sub-elite sort of thing, they did a comparison between Waffle and AFL, and sort of you use a little bit of your street smarts and go, well, sub-elite footy is probably going to be a little bit lower than the Waffle. So use that as sort of a benchmark for your absolute top end. But they've got the same for women's footy now as well. There's 2 really good articles out there that we can probably chuck the links in the description. But
absolutely.
There you go too. They give you all of the running demands for different positions for the different female, male. So that's your go-to from there, and then you can use that as a rough guide to see where you go with your data collection.
Absolutely. And the great points as well. Great points. And then once, I think, getting back to your thing about metrics, once you sort of identify what the metrics are, you can even look at the metrics they use in research. That might give you a bit of a clue as well as to what people are doing and using with data. But you can even ask the GPS company manufacturer themselves, because a lot of those people have sports science and strength and conditioning backgrounds. So there's a lot of information that you can get with your representative for whatever GPS company you're using. But for me personally, let's go basic ones. We can go, first of all, duration. That's the key there. So you can look at drill duration or session duration, how long they are. Then we'll go total distance, obviously. And then you can look at distance via drills. And then we'll go intensity. So we measure intensity by distance over time. So essentially it's like a relative metric of intensity. Meters a minute is generally what that's looked at. That's a common one in terms of looking at how quick your drills are, your session is, and easy to compare against the game. And then you want to probably look at maybe your high speed running. So there's a couple of different bands there you might look at, maybe sort of like just a high speed band, and then maybe a sprint effort as well. That's probably another 2. And then after that, I'd probably say you probably just want to look at accelerations and decelerations from there. Like there's probably 6 to 8 you'd probably want at the max there. Have you got any there, or is that basically what you'd say?
That's like the work I've done with SPT's base package. That's essentially what you get. You get those values there, and you, like you said, my plans for training, I already know roughly what I want to do. It's just for me to then go, all right, did we actually do what we anticipated? And what you find is if you actually plan it out and you use a trundle wheel and you measure out your running intervals and stuff like that, for that stuff, I know. And then for drills and stuff, well, that's more the coach organizing that. But now after doing it for, a couple of seasons, you have a bank of data and you go, okay, I roughly know that we're going to do, if we do this drill and we do it for about 20 minutes, we're going to get 2Ks worth of running, this much high speed, that sort of stuff. So like you said, it's all about going back to your data set, but you get everything you need out of those 6 to 8 variables, especially for the sub-elite level. Like really what you're looking at is, I'm looking at distance. You want to know your high speed meters, you want to know your sprints, and then the intensity is pretty helpful as well. So if you're relying on them, and then, I mean, accelerations, decelerations, we said it's pretty hard. But again, you can just sort of refer to that, that needs analysis data and go, okay, let's aim for that many in the training session and see what it picks up. And if you do deliberate accel, decel work in your warm up, you can sort of go, okay, did it pick it up or didn't it? And then you go, okay, maybe that's not going to be useful. So you just got to use your coach's eye a little bit as well. It's not just, it's going to tell me everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're great. Like, they're great points. I don't think I have anything more to add to that. There's a lot of other fancier metrics as well, which I don't think you necessarily need with high-tech units in terms of like collisions and like basically inertial stuff in terms of like the forces in each direction and planes of the body and running imbalances and symmetry and stuff. I don't think you really need that at the sub-elite level.
No, I don't think so either. Like, especially if you're just doing it, like, the thing you got to think about as well is that you're going to have to present this to players and coaches. So the simpler it is, the easier it is. And you don't need to be spending half an hour with every person teaching them about, the different planes of motion and how force goes through there. So, I think simple is better in this case. I think just before we move off the point of the metrics and the variables, so one thing you did bring up is these speed zones or these speed bands. And one thing I've found is that each company's a little bit different. Their default one will be a little bit different. And so how do you go about probably tailoring that to your particular group? Because if your bands aren't right, then your sprint data and your high speed data potentially might be out of whack because the zones may not be aligned. Or, if you're looking at your zone meters, how would you go about determining this factor?
Well, I think first and foremost, research again is your best friend. So try and find some information on what people have done previously in terms of setting bands and what speeds those bands are at. And then hopefully you can customize them from there. But what I would say on terms of best speed bands, so there's generally there's 2 ways people generally do it. And one is they try and figure out the individual speed bands that differentiate their 90%, 70%, whatever it is to make high speed stuff, which is fine. And then people just do a standardized approach where they say high speed is going to be anything over 5 meters a second in speed or 7 meters a second or whatever it is. Me personally, I like the standardized approach. And why I like the standardized approach is for a couple of different reasons. The first one is if you want to have a look and assess somebody's firstly ability to get to high speed running, then I think it's a lot easier to look over a report that has everybody at the same band, and you can easily see, well, who has the capacity to get to the high speed running itself. And as a strength and conditioning coach or whoever it might be, if they can identify, okay, well, this guy's getting a lot of high speed running, this guy's not getting any, but his work rate's pretty good, is it a case that he just doesn't have that pace or he doesn't have that speed or whatever it is? So that in itself can be a coaching cue. Whereas what I think and what I believe may happen in terms of like using sort of specific threshold bands for people is that it gets hidden a little bit. So if you're not naturally a faster athlete and you're a bit of a plotter, but you're still working at a relative pace that's pretty high for you, then that looks good on the reports. But is that still building your capacity as an athlete to actually grow and get better? You know what I mean? So like there's a double-edged sword there, but then obviously if you're working at as close as you can go, then that's still high speed as well. So I see both sides of it. I personally like the standardized approach because you know exactly where everybody's at on the same page, which is, again, is probably more appropriate for the sub-elite level because of the time constraints we have and the people we have as well. We don't have all these S&C coaches, people we can work with. So I'm not sure. What do you think about that?
Yeah, the standardized approach I was going to say straight away because even when prescribing running drills and training, sometimes you're working with 60 blokes. And it's pretty bloody hard. Like it's hard enough to remember all their names, let alone what their running speeds and shit are. So you got to set up drills that are set for them. So, you know, I just break my group up into 4 running groups and I just average out off their 2K time trial times, like quarter the group, and then just set up the cones and sort of there's a bit of an honesty policy to it, but again, we're at sub-elite level. So generally what will happen is if someone's slacking off, the boys will let them know that they're slacking off. And that's how I break up the running groups. So again, when I'm looking at those speed bands, it's the same. If you keep it as simple and you're just looking at the same linear chart essentially, and you're just comparing everyone against the same metrics, and it's a lot easier to analyze and go, yeah, like you said, this guy clearly can get to higher speed. This guy can't. Maybe let's work on a bit of acceleration or speed with them. So, certainly when you've got more time and resources, then the upper echelon's a little bit easier to do when you individualize it.
Absolutely. Could not agree more.
Yep. So we've spoken about all the things that we should do and collect, but I think as we're talking about, there is a lot of data and sometimes this information can be used in the wrong way. So I guess what shouldn't GPS units and data be used for, Rob?
As a selection tool, first and foremost. The coach should have all the information given to their athlete in terms of their physical fitness and from that point of view, but it should not be solely used as a selection tool because that's just a disaster waiting to happen. Because I could tell you numerous stories of the best athletes or the best actual players of a particular game getting the worst, work rate and all that sort of stuff, but they're still the best player. And there's some things that GPS can't measure, and ability is one of them. So it may be that they get poor work rate compared to everyone else because they're smarter and they know how to position themselves better on the field or whatever it might be. So there's numerous confounding variables with that. So that's the main one, mate. Like there's a lot of horror stories around that, I reckon.
Yeah, I've heard stories of in the cricket space of people missing out on tours from the national team because their testing or their GPS meters weren't as good as someone else, despite perhaps maybe their technical ability being better. So yeah, as you say, it certainly nothing can track or monitor natural skill and ability in the game, and that's something that can only sort of be observed by the coach's eye or in video or anything like that. So I think the GPS, for that sense, certainly, it's not a selection tool.
Oh no. I don't think we need to say too much more on that because I think people understand it. But like, if we could tell a few stories, I'm sure we'd have a few to get through.
Yeah. All right. So probably just capping off. So in terms of we've collected the data, we've got it. We're not using it as a selection tool. How do we actually then present this data and give feedback to probably the players, but also how do we present it to the coaches because they may want to use it as feedback as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first step is probably to educate both parties on what information they're going to be given and what that information means and how it can help them. So coaches, you can probably go a bit more in depth and tell them exactly what the information is and how we think it translates to performance and work rate and where athletes are at. Athletes, you can probably water that down a bit and just tell them obviously their own personal sort of stats where they're at And then hopefully if you can get to the stage where you can create benchmarks and averages and expectations, then that's an easy way to show people where they're at. Because if we want to talk from athletes personally, what tends to happen is they want to know where they're at compared to everybody else, which is fair enough because that is a competition itself, but you also need context as to what this information is. Because obviously if you get given data demo that's just you look at it, you think, well, that's great, but what does it actually mean? So you need obviously appropriate contextual information with that. And for me, that's probably creating benchmarks in terms of expectations around what you should get for a drill and what's a good intensity and work rate. That's a good thing. And then for coaches, you can probably get a bit more variation in what you give and a bit more holistic. So you could probably give more information on, firstly, well, this is where the group's at in terms of our load as a collective or individually, or you can identify players that aren't fit enough or they're not working hard as they should through various benchmarks there. So I think as a conceptual thing, I'd probably give coaching staff a lot more of the everything as a whole in terms of the different outlets, in terms of how athletes are going, where the program's going, how our loads are tracking versus what we want, which is, I think, and that's still easy information to give, and it's not too technical, which I think is important. And then obviously for athletes, it'd probably give more discrete data in terms of where they're at compared to where we want them to be, using might be positional benchmarks or drill benchmarks, something along those lines. And how you give that in terms of reporting. Charts are pretty good for athletes as well, like, graphical stuff that's easy to read. Small tables are fine as well, like whether that be Excel or even if you use the generic ones that you can get from the GPS software, is fine. Again, for coaches, probably less text the better, and less explanation via the written word, and more in terms of graphs and tables that are easy to understand.
Yeah, I think when you're presenting it to a coach, you probably want to do it in person as well.
Yes,
and you can go through it there. I think the only other thing is, if you don't have the capacity or you haven't set up your benchmarks yet, at least showing the athlete how they've progressed so far. So if you've collected data over 6 to 8 weeks of the start over the preseason, this is where you were day one, this is where you are now. That might be in terms of like something as simple as distance, or your high speed meters is really increased, and or your top speeds really increased. So things like that. If you don't have the capacity yet to provide those benchmarks, which even at the sub-elite levels, not too difficult to do. You just need to crunch some data. But at the first starting point is just at least some individual feedback to show, okay, this is what you're doing. Or maybe if you've done it the year before, okay, this is where we're at this time last year. You're actually below that, or actually you're well above it. So, I think that's great. That's great insight.
That is great insight, Dan. Absolutely, 100% agree with that, because like you're right. Like an athletes get a lot out of that, saying where they're at and all that sort of stuff. And easy, like for me, I think meters a minute would be a good one simple variable to give to people, because generally if you're working hard and obviously the amount of high speed running you get is also dependent on the drill you do. So like if you just use a meters a minute metric, then that sort of covers a lot of bases there if you want to keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah, I think so. I think the one thing too is people at the sub-elite level, they're really interested in it, like you said, because the pros get it, and there's apps out there and they love it. They love just saying, oh shit, is that actually how much running I did at training, or that information, and just giving them the app alone, and you upload the data, and then you can give some insight when you see them next. But after training, they can log in and have a look and go, and then if they have any questions, they can sort of hit you up. So I think just by having that information out there, players get a little bit more interested and start to ask more questions, and are probably a little bit more aware of what they are doing. And you'll find the guys that wear the units, they try to compete against each other as well. I definitely see that at our training where I work. There's always that competitive edge, and they'll be looking at the app and checking out what the other players did as well. So
absolutely. And again, that's great points, Damo. And I can't add much more to that because I think you've covered it. We topped that off there pretty well.
Yes, I think that's it, Rob. We've covered a fair bit there in that sort of half an hour, 40 minutes.
Yeah, I reckon that was pretty good. I think we might just finish off. Like, I'll give people like just a step-by-step approach as to how you want to do it. And I think the first step is, obviously, if you want to use the technology, is try and find try and find a supplier of that first. So do your due diligence there and try and get as many units as you can for the best price you can. So start from there. Obviously, collect data first before you start making decisions. So collect as much as you can training and competition. Then while you're doing that, look at your competition demands, whether that be from research or wherever you can find that information, from sports science graduates, uni students, whoever you can get good information from. Keep tracking your drills, create databases from that, hopefully benchmarks as you're going when you collect that data, and then create it like a nice little reporting system where you give information to athletes and coaches and things that you can have conversations about regularly, and keep referring to that information and presenting it as well as you can, and give feedback where you want. Avoid using it as a selection tool where possible. But also understand that when you're reporting on work rates and all that sort of stuff and trying to rank players in terms of their fitness and how hard they're going and whether they've got any ticker or not, remember that some drills have positional demands as well, that some positions won't do as much as others. So remember that there's other considerations, and what the numbers tell you aren't necessarily everything in the context of what's actually happened as well. So they're probably the main things, and just learn and adapt and try again until you learn, adapt, and try and get it to where you want to be.
Yeah, I think the only thing to add, and it's probably for a completely other conversation, but you need to be good at Excel or some sort of stats package. It just makes your life 10 times easier. If you've got no idea and you're crunching in data manually, that's going to make that process even longer. So I think that's one step of it as well. You need to know how to analyze data and do it quickly, because otherwise, your data analysis period, it's rather than just quickly uploading and downloading your data, it becomes a 4 or 5 hour process if you can't actually use formulas and do it quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So that might be another topic for another day, Dave.
I think so. Yeah.
Step-by-step tutorial. All right. Well, I think that might do us, though, Damon?
I think so.
Beautiful. Well, if you got anything out of today's video or podcast or whatever the form you're listening on or watching, then please consider subscribing and liking to the channel and to the podcast stream, wherever you're watching on as well, and go check out some of the other content we've got. We really have a focus towards sub-elite athletes and team sports there and high performance around that. So feel free to contact us if you've got any questions, information on our various platforms: Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, our website. There's plenty of stuff going on there as well. So more than happy to help people out in any way, shape, or form that we can, and offer any expertise that we have, Damo.
Yeah, I think if you want to add to the conversation, or you think there's something that we said wasn't the right way to do it, or you did enjoy it, leave a comment. I think we're definitely going to chuck this one up on LinkedIn, so we might have a bit of a conversation there. So if you are an industry professional or a student and you're looking to do these sorts of things, make sure you get in touch, and we'll generate a conversation around that. Yeah,
absolutely. Beautiful. Happy to have dialogue as well. I think it makes it all better, doesn't it? If you can have some intellectual discussions. You don't know what you don't know, so if you've got a question, ask it. And if you've got constructive criticism or anything along those lines in terms of processes, then let's make each other better.
Yeah, exactly.
Beautiful. All right. Well, I think we've got a few TRIAX 180s in the works as well, so keep your eye out for them if you want to see some hotly contested debates. And there's plenty of other stuff to keep you occupied in the meantime until we see you then.
Yep, that's it from me, Rob.
All right, good stuff. All right, dinner time. See you later.
That's it.